Good evening, and welcome to our latest live stream. Hi, Craig. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, Duncan.
Yeah, enjoy
Thanks.
your
And
holiday.
yourself? You right? I did. I did. Had a
Yeah,
great time. And now we're
excellent.
back to it, back to
Absolutely
our live streams again.
fantastic. I think some schools are on half term this week, so I suspect it might be a
Mm.
little quieter in our chat window than in our live
hmm
chat than it sometimes is. But if therefore we could ask those of you who are joining us live to make up for any missing people who are enjoying their holidays by answering the questions, that'd be great. Um, if you aren't joining us live, if you're watching it later on catch up, obviously you can't join on in with the live chat, but you can pause your video and have a think about some of these questions. Um, if you if you haven't already, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. That helps other people find these. Okay, shall we get straight on with it? Evaluating functionalism.
Yeah, let's get started. Let's get started.
Okay,
We're going to think the first activity we're looking at is a bubble quiz, isn't it?
I believe it is. Bear with me a
It
second.
is a bubble quiz.
Here we go.
Okay, off we go. So the bubble quiz, for those of you who haven't seen it before, it's like a multiple choice quiz, and the number of answers that you can have that are correct range from 0 to 4. Now, what we've done with this bubble quiz is we're going to put in some common kind of evaluations that students use of different theories. Now, when I wrote this, I focused on education and crime because I thought, well, everybody does education and crime, and then realized that some students may not have done crime, so we might have to explain a little bit about things like strain theory, Clode Nolan, and status frustration as we go along.
We
Well,
might,
first
but
of all, we're going
I
to
suspect most have probably touched on that. If they've started crime at all, then they're likely to have done that early on,
yeah,
aren't they? Early doors, but yeah.
yeah. Just in case anybody's doing it
Yeah.
later on in the year, well, you'll be ahead.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at some of the functionalist ideas. Now, if you remember the idea that Davidson will put forward, which is the idea of role allocation, what we want to do is we want to come up with explicit evaluations for role allocation. So an explicit evaluation is one that directly refers to the point that has been made. So if you've made this point that education system sorts individuals into their future roles, which of these four, and the answers can be between 0 and 4, would be an explicit evaluation of the idea that the education system is meritocratic and students are sifted and sorted into their own roles? Would one be that it's outdated? Could we use Bowles and Gintis' myth of meritocracy as a direct evaluation? Can we say that it fails to consider cultural factors? And can we look at social class differences in university selection? And which of these might be an explicit evaluation of this point? Bit of a tough one to start with today,
It
isn't it,
is
really?
tough, isn't it? Yeah, straight in with some tricky
Well,
stuff.
evaluation is probably the hardest skill that sort of like students
Yeah.
have to master. It certainly differentiates your A students from your A star students from your A and B students.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to evaluate.
Yeah. Shall we look at this one and help people on
Mm-hmm.
by looking at this one,
Yeah.
and then we'll. Okay.
So we've gone here with the Bowles and Gintis myth of meritocracy. Of course, role allocation suggests that the education system is meritocratic. An explicit evaluation of this could be by saying that Marxists, such as Bowles and Gintis, would suggest that the education system is not meritocratic. In fact, they suggest that there is a myth of meritocracy that is promoted through education. And that would be an explicit evaluation of role allocation. It's a good one to use. You could potentially, depending on the question, use that as a totally separate paragraph. Or if, for example, you got a nice question like evaluate the contribution of functionalists to our understanding of education, you could use this as an explicit evaluation of Davis and Moore's ideas. The other one is social class differences in university selection. This actually, you can link this in and sort of say, well, actually, if students do well, regardless of their social class background, why is it that working class students end up in the non-Russell group universities? Why do they choose something else? Because there must be other factors at play. So therefore, it fails to explain in a meritocratic society why there is still a social class divide at university. Bit of a tougher one than you would probably see, but you could certainly use that as an explicit
Mm-hmm.
evaluation. The other two, they may or may not be true. However, they don't really refer to the specific point. We could argue and there's lots of arguments still exist about whether education is meritocratic or not. So we probably wouldn't say that Davis and Moore's ideas are outdated. We would sort of like say that they're promoting an idea, but it doesn't happen. And it fails to consider cultural factors. It's not really relevant to the point of what's going on at the purpose of role allocation.
Okay.
Let's look at our second question. Now we've got the idea a little bit. Which of the following are explicit evaluations of the idea of value consensus? Obviously, this is put forward by functionalists, the idea that the education system promotes these norms and values that prepare us for our future, prepare us for future that gets us into this value consensus, the shared norms and values of society. So, as an explicit evaluation, which one of these can we use? Or which 2 or 3 or 4 can we use? Ideas that are transmitted by education are based on dominant ideologies. It fails to explain why some pupils underachieve. Education transmits patriarchal ideology. You might imagine which sociological group would suggest that. And the diversity of modern society means that consensus is difficult. Which of these might be an explicit evaluation of the idea that schools share norms and promote norms and values that lead into a value consensus?
Give people a chance to suggest something in the chat window.
Yeah, it's one that you kind of have to think about a little bit.
Yeah, you just have to stick a letter in if you think it's a clear evaluation, direct evaluation of this point. We'll talk about this more later, but remember, evaluation is not particularly relevant to this one, but evaluation can take different forms. I think there might be one later coming up where there could be an explicit evaluation that isn't a criticism. I think we're mainly focusing on criticism.
You think about it, transmitting ideas. Gabby has said C. That is one of the correct answers. You're
Very
right,
good.
Gabby.
Well done.
C is one of the correct answers. It transmits a patriarchal ideology. So how you would address that is if you've explained that education transmits norms and values that lead to a value consensus, you can say, however, feminists would suggest that the norms and values that are transmitted are actually patriarchal.
Yeah.
And that way you're tying it explicitly to the point that you've made, and that's good quality evaluation.
There's another one that's very closely related to that, isn't there?
Another good thing to think about as well is when a good evaluation will use the language of the main kind of paragraph, if you like, and that might give you a hint with another one.
Yeah, it's one way you can show that you're being explicit is to echo the language in the point that you're evaluating.
We've got C. Should we reveal them?
Okay, I will do. Here we go.
A, C, and D. Okay, so we've already explained something like the patriarchal ideology. You could alternatively discuss the idea again, Marxist versus functionalist idea, that actually functionalists will say that education transmits norms and values towards a value consensus. However, Marxists would disagree and say the norms and values lead us towards the dominant ideology of those in control, or you could even argue it leads us towards ideology such as capitalism. And then the final one there, diversity in modern society means consensus is difficult. You're directly referencing this idea that there is a consensus, and you can sort of like say in modern society, because we have such different lifestyles amongst us, it's very difficult to obtain a consensus, and therefore the education system fails to promote a value consensus in society.
And although you've described that as the diversity of modern society, that might be
more
of a
contemporary. Contemporary might be a better one. Yeah. Okay. Contemporary society may be a better thing. It's rather than getting people confused.
Takes up more space on the bubble. Yeah, takes up more space on the bubble.
Yeah. It might be another line. Now, this one might, if you haven't done crime, you might struggle. So the idea of strain theory is put forward by Robert King Merton, and he argued that society is based upon this idea of an American dream, that we promote this idea of an American dream to people. And what we have is we have the means of achieving it and whether or not we choose to accept that goal. Okay, so he suggested that people adapt to this goal that everybody, wants to get, the American dream, in a number of different ways. The terms just escape me now. Deviant adaptations to strain, what he called them. They're not all deviant, but that's what we commonly refer to them as. And he would sort of say that people will adapt in different ways. So we're going to look to evaluate this and see, right, okay, evaluations can be more than just criticisms. We can find support for these points. And I will say that at least two of these points here would be seen as being more positive than others. So the points here, an evaluation, could it be that it recognises the unequal structure of society? Can it be that left realists would agree with Merton that deprivation is a cause of crime? It fails to acknowledge that not all crime is a choice, could possibly be linked to something, and fails to acknowledge different types of criminal activity.
Got a few answers coming in. Jay suggested D, and B has suggested D and A.
I could see why people would go with D, right?
Gabby's gone with D as well.
I can see why people would go with D, fails to acknowledge different types of criminal activity. But if we think that we can actually apply Merton's strain theory to things like corporate crime, and when you look at the deviant adaptations to strain, the ways in which individuals will react means that they will commit different forms of crime, you might think that maybe it's not quite it's not quite correct.
No, some textbooks say that it doesn't explain non-utilitarian crime, although to a certain extent it does explain some, because of the retreatist adaptation could explain some, but that is often presented, and so I can see how that could come under D potentially, or be linked to D.
Yeah, we can see that, and that's just something we were sort of suggesting there. That sort of Merton's strain theory is a really, really useful theory to know and to use, because you can use it in several different contexts. So that's why we sort of say we can actually talk about several different types of crime through Merton's strain theory. People are going with C. Fails to acknowledge that not all crime is a choice. Well, I will tell you that that is possibly an evaluation of another theory. But not necessarily Merton's strain theory. What we might see that as being an evaluation of rational choice theory. And the two correct ones, and this is where it gets a bit difficult for students sometimes, because you're used to it being a criticism, are actually A and B.
Two strengths. Yeah.
One of the benefits sort of like of Merton's strain theory, a real strength of it, is that it recognises the unequal structure of society. And from a functionalist viewpoint, other functionalists don't seem to acknowledge this, or certainly they don't explicitly acknowledge it. What they will say is that actually inequality is inevitable and it's actually fair. They talk about it being meritocratic, but Merton looks at it and goes, actually the goals that we're setting for people causes inequality, and this is dysfunctional. You can also see that Merton inspired left realist ideas, particularly the idea of relative deprivation. Jock Young drew very heavily on sort of kind of Merton's ideas when he was doing Lee and Young were doing the left realist theory towards crime. So they would sort of like suggest that yes, actually, this relative deprivation, the inability to achieve your society's goals can potentially lead to crime. So you could use either of those two to back up Merton's strain theory.
And that is a form of evaluation. We'll come on to that more later, but we don't necessarily always think of that as being evaluation, but it is.
Yeah. Now again, we're going to go to Cohen. Now Cohen kind of developed his theory based on Merton's strain theory, and he talked about sort of like blocked opportunities. You may have covered this in education. Some people do when they talk about subcultural formation. He suggested there were blocked opportunities, particularly for young working class males, and that therefore they adopted an alternate status hierarchy because they were suffering from status frustration, and instead looked to gain status from their peers. Those ideas were very, very kind of influential, and you can see it in a lot of kind of contemporary work on subcultures as well, the idea of status that is given there. But let's look at an evaluation of it. Okay, so doesn't focus on individual motivations for crime, it only focuses on groups. Influences other sociological theories such as left realism, bear in mind what I've just said about Merton influencing left realism. Fails to acknowledge other methods of obtaining status. Do we all obtain status through peer groups? And fails to acknowledge the crimes of the powerful. Which of those are evaluations of Cohen's status frustration? Which of them can we apply? Jay has come in straight away with all of them, and Jay is correct. I know I'm not giving other people many time. They are all really good evaluations that you could use of ideas of status frustration. So it doesn't focus on individual motivations. It largely focuses on groups. So this subcultural theory. It influences other sociological theories. We mentioned Merton's strain theory did, and when you think about left realism, they talk about subcultures as well. Fails to acknowledge other methods of obtaining status. Well, particularly in contemporary society, education is not our only pathway to gaining status. So when we have blocked opportunities in education, we may gain status through other means. And it fails to acknowledge the crimes of the powerful because it's largely centered on working class boys. So let's go to number 5. I was really quick in there, Jay. Well done. And the last one, Chloe and Nolan. Again, another theory that's kind of extended from strain theory. Their opportunity subcultures, where they suggested that there was a criminal. I'm going to forget this now. Criminal conflict. Oh, what was the third one?
Retreatist.
Do you remember off the top? Retreatist. There you go. Yeah, it's kind of one of Merton's ideas as well, wasn't it? The retreatist sub-theory. So, lack of clarity in defining the different types of subculture. Fails to acknowledge individual motivations for crime. Can be supported by contemporary examples of crime. For example, the work of Winlow. You may have looked at this, or you may not have looked at this yet. There's a work called Badfellas. Looked at the kind of status that was obtained. What we call bodily capital that was obtained by bouncers in the northeast, and fails to acknowledge the crimes of the middle classes.
Gabby's come in with D to start with,
and that is one of the correct answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It certainly does. Again, it focused on focused on lower social classes. J, you are correct as well. C and D. It can be supported by contemporary examples of crime. Winlow actually used a lot of Clode Nolan's ideas, in particular in terms of sort of criminal subcultures and conflict subcultures within his study. I will give you a hint that there is at least one more correct answer there. So C and D are correct. B, yes, D. Sorry, B, D is correct.
B, that's confusing, is it? B the person.
B. B is 2. Sorry, because B's put B2, J's put B. It does fail to acknowledge individual motivations for crime. And the final one is A, because they are all correct. Where we get the A part is that often the kind of conditions of criminal and conflict subcultures often overlap.
Yeah. What is the conflict about?
I mean, often the conflict and the criminal subcultures aren't always organised, and sort of like they are. Sometimes they do cross over into conflicts over areas and things like that. So the boundaries weren't very clear.
And they can even link with the retreatist subcultures as well, because often the conflicts will be about drugs and things like that. So all three can come merge. Yeah, they're not clearly defined.
And of course, sort of like as society evolves, because I mean, Chloe and Nolan were writing in the 50s, 60s?
Yeah.
Maybe earlier, actually. 50s, 60s. And obviously, our society has changed massively since then. So we can argue that sort of like many kind of criminal subcultures nowadays will cross over those distinct boundaries. And that's what Winlow found, particularly when he was looking at the disorganized kind of nature. But it was still linked into a global organized network of crime. So there was like it kind of links into this concept of localization. There was disorganized crime at one stage at the level of sort of like the doorman in Sunderland, but it was going through organized channels of European drug trafficking. Now, good tip for evaluation, right, is that often, particularly when you're evaluating theories, and obviously we are focusing on evaluating functionalism today, is often another theory will say something very similar, but it will have a slight twist on it. we often see some theories as being the alternative side of the coin. If you think of functionalism and Marxism, they would say very, very similar things happen, but they will say for different reasons. So in this activity, we're going to show you a few points that functionalists have made, and we want you to think about other theories. And this is what we call the kind of alternative evaluation. Okay, not to be confused with juxtaposition, because we're tying this specifically to the point that's been made. So here we've said Parsons suggests education acts as a bridge between home and wider society, preparing pupils for life beyond education. What might other theories say about this specifically? The idea that education prepares pupils for life beyond education. I'm thinking specifically about, it tends to be more your other structural theories. However, we will show one where that may be slightly different as well. So, for example, what might Marxists say?
I was going to say, do Marxists agree? Or Jay's come in with
Marxism will say that education mirrors the workplace. So they are saying very, very similar things, that they're preparing them for the next stage. One says it's preparing them for kind of wider society, so they can succeed and so they can become successful. Marxists will say, yes, we are preparing them for the future, but it is actually to be exploited by capitalism. B's just come in there saying Marxists say education reproduces class inequality, which is where I'd gone with it, but you could quite easily have gone with that, the idea of them being prepared.
Correspondence principle would have worked nicely, yeah.
Excellent, yeah. It would have been prepared for a future of, what Bolzingis has called the long shadow of work. So let's have a look at another one. Now, our functionalist point here, we've got with Durkheim. We're trying to keep it very much ones that you might have done so far. Durkheim suggests that education provides pupils with specialist skills needed in the complex division of modern labour. So imagine you're a student, you've made this point, you've got your analysis in, you've done all of the parts, this is how education does this. However, and we're looking for an alternative theory that we can link into this idea of specialist skills and modern labour. Maybe modern's misleading in this one.
It might be. Contemporary,
yeah. Although that's the kind of quote that Durkheim used, wasn't it? The complex division of labour in modern society.
Yeah, and maybe that is where we're going.
that could be a point.
Yeah, that was the society Durkheim was describing. But does it describe our society today?
Marxists say it trains working class students for low skilled and low paying jobs that benefit capitalism. That could be one way of going with it. Yeah, you could go there. Well. It does work well, that they're only given certain skills. They're not given higher knowledge. You could go down the route there of the correspondence theory again, so they're given fragmented knowledge, not given the full knowledge, so therefore they've only got a low level of skill and they are forced off into working in low paid jobs that the middle and upper classes don't really want to do. I'm going to go say that the idea, that word modern might be something that you think about, and particularly with theories. What other theories have modern in them? Because we could quite easily make an evaluation, a number of ways we could evaluate this point when we talk about, well, actually what Durkheim's saying is it's it's not really the case in contemporary society, because we have large numbers of people who are not in education, employment or training. Although interestingly, I've just read some stuff on the new national curriculum. It's not come out yet, but I read a little bit on the interim report, and they were sort of saying one of the main purposes of education was to get students ready for skills of life. And B has come through with the answer, which I've gone with as well. Postmodernism says education doesn't provide a single set of specialist skills. There are many different pathways now. I've used a little bit more terminology in that, but you're spot on there. So you can see there, all you make that point is a postmodern critique of functionalist ideas that everybody is trained up. Well, actually, in our post-Fordist economy, in other words, in a non-industrial economy, there are so many different skills that we can learn. Education cannot prepare you for all of the possible pathways, as B has quite eloquently put. in future, and that would be a really good, strong evaluation of this idea that education gives us the skills we need to succeed.
Excellent. Okay. I'm just thinking now, imagine we got like a 20 marker on paper 3 about evaluate the usefulness of functionalism for our understanding of contemporary society. Oh, what a question. Okay.
That'd be a nice one, I think.
It would be a nice question.
Has that one ever? I don't think that one's come up yet, has it?
Possibly not. We've had some of the other theories, haven't we? So it could do.
Certainly have feminism and Marxism.
Yeah.
Functionalism
we might have had ones that kind of hint at it, take an aspect of functionalism and focus on that. If we were to get a question like that, I'd actually recommend you do a lot of what we've been doing in this session. Certainly illustrate some of the points with things from your topics and the topics that you know well, because then you can bring in some really clear functionalism. But what I want now is just for us to think of the kind of general points. Can we think of some general ways in which functionalism is useful, or less so? We had a question from Felicity saying, do we do these sessions every Thursday? Pretty much. Most Thursdays. We've been doing them for a while now, and they're all still on YouTube, so you can watch them back. I think we've got a week off next week, haven't we, for half term? But then
I can't remember.
I think so, and then back on with it after that.
I know we have a short break when we go off on the Strong Foundations tour.
Because
instead of being at home doing this, we will be sort of like traveling around the country on trains, planes, and automobiles, sort of like
doing this all day in the cinema.
Doing this all day in the cinema, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by 5:30 on a Thursday, we might be pretty tired. So.
Yeah. So this is looking to start with. We'll do sort of one half of the argument. Can anyone think of some ways in which functionalism is useful? Can we think of some ways in which you think it is useful for our understanding of contemporary society? Want to suggest a way?
B has come in there. Is it useful? It shows how institutions work together to maintain social stability.
Excellent.
I think that's a nice point.
Yeah, very good. And that kind of what's the word?
Interconnectedness.
Interconnectedness. That'll do. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
We're both having these moments today. Don't we?
Having senior moments. Yeah, between the institutions, how they work together to help to make society functional. Absolutely. In the little bits we've already talked about, we've mentioned a couple of functionalist theories where we've suggested that they've gone on to influence others. So that could be another area we could say that they've been influential. Shows the importance of shared values in society. Yeah, so you could pick up features of functionalism and say, well, actually, it does this. It does explain this. So, it provides an explanation of the way in which different aspects of society are interdependent, which, is absolutely your first point there, B. And you went beyond that and explained it very nicely.
Gabby's come in with a point as well.
Yeah, it teaches how to cooperate with those who aren't friends or family. So this idea of secondary socialisation and and the impact of that and how that works, and it has been very influential, on other sociologists. We can sometimes say, because the question mentions this thing about contemporary society, there is a point where we could say, and we'll probably do it on the other side, where we say, oh well, it's it's not really relevant to society as it is today, but there are sociologists writing about society more recently, more contemporary society, more contemporary sociologists who are very strongly influenced by functionalism. Now, I've used the example in the right, even though they're not today really either. They're sort of products of the 80s and things, aren't they? But they very much use some of the ideas of the functionalists. We've already mentioned how left realists borrowed functionalist ideas when considering crime and deviance. And there are lots of contemporary sociologists are influenced by functionalism. What about ways in which maybe they're not useful? Functionalism isn't useful. Maybe this might be the point where we start focusing a bit more on that contemporary society bit, but there's other ways we could question its usefulness as well. What we don't want to do is just say other theories are useful, other theories are available, because that's not entirely questioning functionalism's usefulness. It's not useful. It ignores social change and diversity in modern times, from B. Yeah, well done. So it's And Gabby's saying it's outdated, and B's point might be one way in which you could argue maybe it is not describing contemporary society.
Nice point there from Jay as well.
Seems
Functionalism assumes. Sorry, go on.
No, fantastic. Yeah, ignores the existence of conflict and inequality in contemporary societies. Yeah, absolutely. I think between you've got mine, but Greg's going to give you some others. But
I was just going to say that when you get a point like Jay's made and B's made, you can actually run with that and develop it a little bit more to show a really well developed evaluation, which kind of sets you out from other students who may just put a very generic point.
Yeah, bolt on.
So that ability to develop that evaluation. So I'm looking at Jay's point now and thinking, right, okay, you can talk about the inequality that exists in contemporary society. You don't necessarily have to do a big massive paragraph on it, but back that point up and it's showing a really well developed evaluation there.
Yeah. What a lot of students do is either write about, maybe do another paragraph altogether on, say, Marxism or something, without really clearly saying how that makes a judgment on whether functionalism is useful or not. So that becomes sort of a juxtaposition. Or they might just say it just as one or two words towards the end of a paragraph, just kind of bolting it on. And if you can really explain it, then it's much better. So yeah, it disregards fundamental conflicts in society, but yeah, what sort of conflicts? Jay's done a good job of explaining, the sort of inequality in contemporary society. For example, social class divisions, gender divisions, racism, etc. There's lots you could use to illustrate that point. The idea that contemporary society is now much more complex, fragmented, and diverse. So maybe some of these functionalist ideas are no longer relevant to explain our society. Well, in what ways how is it diverse? Can you give an example of that diversity? I'm sure you could. What sort of functionalist theory does that undermine? Does that stop from working? So yeah, that kind of development is always going to make this a lot better. Okay, got the eval-u-wheel.
Excellent. Right. So back over to me. The eval-u-wheel is something that we came up a few years ago, and when we were talking about the different types of evaluation that could come up. Lots of students might get into an exam and think, how am I going to evaluate this point? So we came up with this acrostic. I don't know. I never can tell the difference between this. I think it's an acronym. Which we came up with scale, which was you can, in order to make an evaluation, which is a judgment, you can either look for a strength, a criticism, an alternative viewpoint, as we've done with the on the flip side activity, that kind of makes a similar point but suggests that there is a different reason for it, a limitation, what does this not explain, or we can find some supporting or evidence that might reject the point that has just been made as well. So what we do with this activity is we'll show you a point that a student has made, and it will be a point that is a functionalist point. Okay, we've kind of shortened it, otherwise you would have to read a lot of it. So we've shortened this to Parsons suggests that many social institutions transmit norms and values that allow individuals to take their place in society. We've touched on this a couple of times already, but we're going to spin the wheel to see, are we looking for a strength, a criticism, an alternative viewpoint? What does this not explain, a limitation, or some evidence to support it? So Duncan's going to give it a spin.
Where's it going to land?
Yep. It is landing on an alternative. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit already.
We did with the flip
so what
side.
might be an alternative view? That social institutions transmit norms and values that allow individuals to take their place in society. So what might we do here? I was just checking there. Yes, we are. We're not on next week. That's right. Mm-hmm. We are off for a week.
Thought so.
I was checking myself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've got function. And that's from a previous point. What might be an alternative view that the idea that social institutions transmit norms and values that allow individuals to take their place in society? So again, this idea of value consensus. We may have already touched on this a little bit. So an alternative view might be that there is no consensus. Or B's come in with a good one. Values are diverse and fragmented in modern society. We could go with the conflict approach. kind of either a Marxist approach, a feminist approach, or we could come up with a postmodern approach. The values are so diverse and fragmented that it's difficult to transmit these norms. Let's see what we put. I'm trying to remember myself now. I went with the Marxist view. Suggests that norms and values are transmitted are those of the dominant groups in society that aim to maintain social hierarchies. And Jay's coming with a point about, excellent point. Exactly saying the same thing, that these social institutions are ideological state apparatuses that lead to the oppression of the working class. But what you've done is you've used a theorist to sort of say, well, all thieves who would disagree with this and say, actually, these social institutions, there's your link to the point that you're making, are not transmitting norms and values for everyone to take their place. They're actually transmitting norms and values to control people. So that is a really good, solid evaluation.
Really good.
Let's see what we're going to do with our next one. And I've gone with Durkheim. Again, I tried to keep it to the ones that sort of like everyone may know. So Durkheim suggests that social solidarity is an important part of maintaining social order. We did have a couple of people talk about social order before. What might be an issue with that one?
Well, let's see what type of evaluation we need. Strength.
So we need something to support this idea that social solidarity is an important part of maintaining social order.
There's a few ways you can show support or give strength. It might be another theorist agreeing, a study that supports it. It might be kind of an example that shows it in action. There's quite a few ways you could go about showing support, demonstrating this sort of evaluation.
This idea of social solidarity. You can also think about sort of like where we see social solidarity, particularly if you've done any of Durkheim stuff, particularly in education, crime, beliefs in society. Trying to think, where else does Durkheim crop up? He has something to say about most things. Work, poverty and welfare is in there. He's in culture and identities. He does get around, does Emil? Not as much as Tolkien Parsons. I don't think there's one section of the course where Parsons doesn't have something to say.
I think Parsons is in literally everything.
Yeah. Even global development.
Yeah, I was going to say global development, Oh, we've got B.
School assemblies where pupils learned. Yeah, that's a good example as well. So we can see that social solidarity is an important part of maintaining social order. And let's back this up. For example, school assemblies where pupils learn shared values and rules. It helps us to maintain social solidarity. And now we're looking at something like, why is this important? So it's a good point you've made there, B.
And I guess when we think, why do schools do kind of all school assemblies, if they do, and obviously bigger schools might struggle to do that, but it is social society and to promote order within the school.
And again, looking at the national curriculum documents, there is a point in there where they talk about the purpose of schools, and they say to make people responsible citizens in a democratic society. That's one of the three main aims that they have set out. So it shows you that these are still very, very relevant in contemporary society. National holidays like Remembrance Day, excellent. So some people get brought together and have shared identity. Jay's talking about institutions transmitting shared norms and values, creating social cohesion. If we get an example of those, then that becomes part of your evaluation, because you're really back up the point there. I think I've gone with something very similar to B, if I can remember rightly.
Yeah, let's have a look.
Have we reveal it?
I will in a sec. Yeah, there we go.
Through ceremonies, celebrations, and rituals. Okay, I've kept it very broad, but yes, exactly. So things like national holidays. An example, like I always use about social solidarity, is whenever there is a World Cup or European Cup tournament or Rugby World Cup or whatever, there's a lot of social solidarity kind of around those events, where people come together and they try to celebrate this is what unites them. In some ways, when you think about sort of like something like football is incredibly divisive for most of the year, and then once every 2 years, everybody comes together and it's like, yeah, come on, let's go. So it does reinforce social solidarity.
Okay, we're going to finish off with a silly activity, which we haven't done this year. So
I thought it was
about time we did one. So it's unlikely anyone's seen one of these before, unless you were joined us last year on these. So this is, if you've ever seen Richard Osman's House of Games, the final round on that is something called Answer Smash, and it's kind of based. This is based on that. So you get a picture and a clue, and you sort of smash them together to create a new word. The example there has nothing to do with sociology. You've got an elephant, you've got a clue that leads you towards Antarctica. You smash them together and it becomes Elephantarctica. So in other words, the end of the first word is the beginning of the second. But these three are going to be about functionalism. So we've got some sort of dessert, and we've got a state of normlessness. So the important bit, of course, is the sociological concept. So working out what's on the right-hand side is more important than being able to recognise the dessert.
And don't forget, it'll be a functionalist concept as well.
Yeah, so can you think of a concept to do with functionalism that is a state of normlessness? If you can smash it with the dessert, then great. But yeah, anomie, Jay, well done. It is anomie. That is meant to be a flan, so it's.
I've got to admit,
flanomie. It looks more like a creme caramel, to be honest, doesn't it?
Yeah, I when I saw that, I was like, is that like a creme brulee or something? I don't know. I mean, I'm not well. Believe it or not, I'm not actually that well up on desserts.
Really?
I know I look like I'm well up on desserts, but you know.
Yeah. Google Images
reckons
it's a flan. But okay, a functionalist idea that suggests that society is like a human body, and we have a Avengers character on the left. Again, the functionalist idea is more important than the Avengers character.
Sociology, yeah.
Sometimes it can help you get it though, because if you know the one, well done, Jay. Thor. Well, nearly, very nearly. Yeah, and B's got the organic analogy, and yeah, it's the Thor, and it was Thor. Yeah, so Thor organic analogy is the important bit, absolutely. So well done, B, for getting the right answer.
I do worry sometimes that sort of like students may watch these and sort of they come away and sort of like go, Chris Hemsworth's idea of the organic analogy.
Yeah, or write the organic analogy in the exam, and then it's. Yeah, but if one person remembers the organic analogy because of Thor, then it's helped, hasn't it?
Excellent.
We got a logo of a company there, but it's been hidden. But we have a logo, and then Parsons said this was a woman's role in the family. So, well done, Jay. Fantastic. Yeah. So the Pizza Express was the brand, and the expressive role is the important bit. I went with the expressive leader, but that's what it's talking about. Is expressive role, the person who leads on the expressive role in the family. Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to come back to. Well done, well done, B. You got it as well. Come back to
expressive.
Yeah, fantastic. That was really good. Enjoyed that. Some good answers. So yeah, we're not here next week, but I think we are here in 2 weeks' time, and I think we're moving on to Marxism. I think we'll be
6th of November. I just checked it as we were doing the 6th of November. Analysing Marxism.
Analysing Marxism. Okay.
And we do actually have we do actually run through then every week from the 6th of November all the way through to the 18th of December every Thursday.
Wow. There you go. Actually,
I don't think it's always us two, but
no, might be others. For particularly while we're away doing strong foundations, I think there are others doing these. But so that will be very good. Of course, you'll be very welcome to join us at a strong foundations cinema workshop. Your school might not be bringing you, but you could take the day off and come and do some sociology instead. I'm sure they'd be delighted if you did. I might like to say that. As long as you got permission. As long as you got permission, yeah.
We're not encouraging people to skip school.
Absolutely not. Okay, it's great to see you, Craig. Thanks very much, everybody, for your answers. See you in a couple of weeks' time. Bye bye.
Thank you. Have a great holiday wherever you are, if you're on half term.